Record. Okay.
Right.
Hello, Panos. Hello, everybody. Hello. So we are ready to start. Welcome, everybody, again. Thank you for being with us. Today's lesson belongs to FERENCE VARGA, our dear friend and collaborator. Thank you very much, FERENCE.
Thank you. So thank you,
You can
Lamprino.
start as you wish.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is FERENCE VARGA. I'm a fashion and costume designer based in Belgrade. So I will be holding two lessons, one this week and one next week. So today we will be talking mostly about Western theater and the costume design, of course. So we will go through a little bit about the history of textiles and the concept of design in theater, and we will cover some developments that happened through history. And next week we will be talking more about the film industry. So I will share my presentation, and afterwards I will also share some of my experiences in this industry. And afterwards, I'm looking forward to your questions, and we can have a nice conversation about the whole subject if anybody's interested. So, without further ado, I will start the presentation. So everybody sees this, right?
Yes,
Right.
FERENCE.
Here we are.
Perfect.
So, with Mika, you already covered some of the history of clothing and history of costume design. So I will try to be brief in the parts where I think that you're already familiar with, so I can cover something new. So you already learned about ancient theater in ancient Greece and Rome, but so you maybe have heard that it was that the theater started in ancient Greece as part of a celebration of Dionysus, and parts of those celebrations represented theatrical performances where actors were clothing that was contemporary for the time, which is most often the chiton, which was a draped costume pinned with fibulas and different accessories, wearing masks that were usually made out of wood or leather, and those masks gave a possibility to change from characters quite quickly and to be visually explain it more, to be more conveying to the audience. They also wore leather sandals that were a bit higher in a platform, so they would be more visible. So even though the clothes were quite contemporary, there were already quite a few adjustments made in order for it to be more presentable and more conveying to the public. Here we have a wonderful depiction. It's on a vase, I believe, of Medea leaving Corinthos after she murdered her sons. And as you can see, the costume is quite elaborate. Now, in Roman times, so in ancient Greek times, oh, just one moment. It's very loud in Belgrade right now. So in Greek times, plays were part of celebrations. But in Roman times, the theater became something for entertainment of the wider public. So later on, as Christianity came along and the medieval times, the theater had a little bit of a mixed history. The institution of theater was seen as paganistic, so it was not accepted. The idea of performances moved into churches, and theatrical performances became sort of a reenactments of scenes from the Bible. The clothes were most often borrowed from the clerics, or everyday clothes that could be seen as something that was fitting for the Bible. After a certain point, it became a little bit more elaborate. or grandiose, so we say. So it turned a little bit into a religious spectacle. And the costumes were inspired by Byzantine history and so on. But at some point, the Catholic Church had enough of it. So they banned even that. So at some point in this 10 centuries, theater disappears. Theater as we know it today disappears completely. And it will not appear for quite a long time. Instead, what we had were more something along the line of traveling troubadours, who were singers and performers, who were doing pantomime and musical numbers and so on. They, in some way, kept the essence of what theater is, even though they didn't pay much attention to costumes, so to say, because usually they wore contemporary clothes. But fortunately, humanity started questioning their existence in the Middle Ages because they were just not happy with the idea of living for eternal salvation, where you have to deprive yourself of any earthly enjoyment in order to hope when you meet your maker, you will go into heaven. So that will to find something better, a greater existence than that, drew to a great rebirth that we today call Renaissance. So in Renaissance times, they rediscovered antiquity. And through antiquity, they rediscovered values, aesthetics, tragedies, and the theater. So little by little, it started reviving. As it started reviving, the tragedies started to revive, but also it started to develop as well on its own. So in Elizabethan England, we have theaters being built for, of course, we are all very well familiar with William Shakespeare and his plays. So they started doing contemporary pieces for the time. The clothing or the costumes for the play were usually borrowed from aristocrats who were benefactors of the theater. So the costumes were quite rich and quite elaborate. But as the institution of the theater started to build up and grow on its own, we had actors who became more and more prominent, who could invest in having their own costumes because they had to be elaborate. So at that time, if you wanted to have an elaborate costume, you really had to have all the means to pay for it. And one of the first idea of a professional troupe was Commedia dell'arte. You've heard about Commedia dell'arte in the last presentation from Mika, and you may be familiar that they started in Renaissance, and there was the first troupe where they used the idea of visual profiling through masks and costumes. They had plays that were relatively scripted. There was a basic script that existed, but there was a lot of improvisation, and and they had a lot of parts, musical numbers, pantomime, and and most often they were comedic parts, and they had very strong parts that were already very well known to them, but then to the public as well. So we have Arlecchino, Pulcinello, Colombine, and Pierrot. So, and all these characters have a very known profile that could be read on the costume. And what I can say is that at this time, luckily, women were allowed to perform, because in the beginning, women were not allowed to perform male roles. And especially in the Elizabethan theater, that's the time when it broke, that women started. But before that, men would usually play the female roles, which meant that the female costumes had to be more elaborate in order to feminize masculine features. So in popular culture today, it is considered that drag queens, the word drag derive from Shakespearean theater, that the male performers who were performing female roles were called drag.
Wow.
But to come back to Commedia dell'arte, you have here a few examples of how these characters looked. So as theater started to develop in Renaissance time, they started experimenting and researching and looking for new ways of artistic expression, and that gave birth to two very distinctive forms of theatrical performance. One of them is ballet and the other one is opera. First, I would like to talk about ballet. So the Renaissance gave birth to ballet, which derived from court dancing. So from elaborate court spectacles, somehow at some point in the 17th century, it became a more of a concert performance. Here we have a picture of Louis XIV. Was a very, very great fan. So the ballet started in Italy, but it was the height of Baroque and Rococo ballet was really in France. Here we have a picture of Louis XIV wearing his very famous ballet costume. He himself liked to perform a lot because he branded himself early on as the Sun King. He was one of the first, we can compare it, for instance, to today's pop stars, the pop musicians who want to be part of the popular culture. They always need a distinctive visual appearance in order to convey their brand. Well, quite a few centuries before that, Louis had the same idea. And those initial dance costumes, as ballet started to evolve, were really something that derived from the current fashion. You already covered fashion history, so I will not go very deep into that. But here you can see on this costume the mind of an 18th century person. In order to convey his personality as the Sun King, he really went overboard with the symbolicism. So they were not very minimalistic or quiet, because you can see so many motifs of sun on him. So you see it on its head, on the collar, on the shoulders. He has a big sun on the belly, on the skirt, on the shoes. So he's covered in the rays of sun, because it was the style of excess decoration to convey an idea. Those early ballet costumes were also very, very difficult to move in, because early ballet was not as sophisticated in movement as we see it, for instance, today. So it's something that cannot be compared. We have to understand that it was something that was based on court dancing. So the costumes had to be even more elaborate as they went on stage, because they had a message to convey. So they were heavily, heavily decorated. They were very, very expensive. And in the beginning, they were very heavy to move in. But the movements as well were quite simple. So they didn't have something that's a specific ballet shoe. They danced pretty much in the footwear they were wearing all the time. But as time progressed, as the art form developed, so did the ballet costume. And in the classical ballet era, in the 19th century, costumes were designed to complement the choreography. So, and they started really to, after complementing the choreography, the idea of portraying a character became a little bit more simplified and a little bit more conceptual. So there were several styles of ballet costume that developed through this time. So we have the romantic tutu that you will see later, and I will explain how it's made, which is usually worn by the main performer, the main ballet dancer, female ballet dancer, because it allows the movement. You also have the romantic tutu that is depicted here. It's a longer, softer skirt, and usually all these characteristics were portrayed around conveying a character, because if the character is a soft character, the fabric had to be soft as well. If the character was a stronger personality, so was the fabric that created the costume. So one of the most famous ballets in this time is Giselle, and later on in Russia, in the 19th century, Russia will become the most famous center for ballet performance, where Tchaikovsky will create some of the ballet pieces that are considered classics even today. So as you see her feet, even though it is a drawing, you will see that it is not a 18th century shoe, because the movement became more and more difficult, more and more demanding, and more sophisticated. So did the footwear develop. And then we have a picture. So this is in today's time. This is Roberto Bolle and Zakharova dancing Giselle. And you see that it is quite different, because with time the fabric adapted, and you see the famous ballet slipper that allows certain movement. Now in composing, or maybe I can talk about a little bit about this. The ballet costumes, even today, are meticulously designed and crafted to withstand the demand of performances. So one of the main features that a ballet costume, so main characteristic of a costume has to be durability, and to make it as light as possible, even though it's very difficult in construction and there's a very much to it. So one has to be very crafty and very knowingly approach designing a ballet costume. So I would like to show you, I will change the screen sharing a little bit. So I can show you a video of a classical ballet performance. Let me just find it. Here we have. So you see this. And now you will see a performance of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, where you will see all the elements of classical ballet performance. So you will see the solo dancers, the male and the female, who at some point you will think that they wear the least of the most simplest costumes, but that's because they have to be allowed to move. And you will see the ensemble, and they are wearing a little bit of the romantic costumes, which are quite lighter and appropriate to their movement, because they do not dance as the solo dancers. And you will also see walking parts or extras who are clothed in heavy period clothes, because their parts are more visual to represent parents, courtiers, and so on. So let me show you the video. So everybody hears the sound. You also see a court jester.
No, I don't.
We cannot see the video or heard the song.
Yes.
Excuse me?
Yes, Ferenc, sorry, sorry to interrupt everybody. You have problem with playing the video?
So nobody sees the video?
We
No.
only see, yes, the image, but you tried to play it.
All right. I tried to play it, but I will look for it quickly and try to play it from another source that we tried earlier.
Yes, yes, because earlier it was okay.
Okay.
Yes,
It was just a
So
screen
I will-
from your computer.
All right, I will try quickly. One moment. So just 1 second.
Okay, we can hear the sound.
Yes, all right. So now it will be possible. So I will do another screen share.
Yes, Ferenc.
Here we have, you see this.
Yes, here it comes.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so let's try it. Everybody see the video?
Yes, we see.
Yes, yes.
It stacks a little bit.
Yeah, it's not
Yes.
my internet.
Yes, the internet is the reason.
Oh, well, that's a shame because I did, but it's because I tried playing it. I have the video, but unfortunately, you say that you cannot see it when I try to play it.
We see the picture and we hear, but the internet it's not good and it stacks. Or the image
Yeah,
and the voice also, the sound.
internet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pity. I know.
Yeah, so it's not. It's not working.
It's because of the
All
internet.
right.
It's okay.
Then I will try.
This can be a homework for everyone to watch.
Of course, Danilo's
Yes,
very good idea.
I can send links, of course, but maybe. But you see this?
Yes.
Play it.
Yes, we see, Ferenc.
Yes, now it's sharing this. So when I play the video, does it play to you?
Yes, it plays.
Oh, well, then it's all right.
Yeah. And
you see it?
Yes.
We see it and we hear it, and I think we all need to be quiet.
Yes.
So you see the ensemble wherein this is the solo dancer. These are the walking parts, his parents, dressed heavily. And now you will see a solo ballerina wearing a tutu. This actually is one of the most demanding movements in ballet. So now I will show you a video of a costume designer preparing the famous Swan Lake in Canada. And it shows the idea of making a ballet play and how the costumes are made.
Is there a particular reason as to why it's supposed to be like that? Or it aids in a movement? Thank you.
Similar concept. You have a beautiful
Yes, so let's go back to our presentation. Screen share.
Perfect. Okay.
Here we are. So you had a little bit of taste of what classical ballet is and what
I
does
have a question.
Hmm?
Miss Catherine?
Every, is everything all right?
Catherine, you want to
Yeah,
ask?
it's only a question. Yes.
You want to ask
Oh,
something, my dear?
I cannot not it. Probably I ask later on if it's okay. If I
Yes,
cannot ask right now.
at the end, we will have a conversation and everybody can ask anything they want.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Perfect. Yes, and Panos,
So,
yes, FERENCE. Okay, later,
so
after the
from
lesson.
classical ballet, we will move a little bit to contemporary ballet. So as time developed and with the 20th century came along, dancing became more and more experimental. Movement became more and more experimental. So the costumes had to evolve with it. And they were very much not only set to the score, but also set to the choreography. So at this point, the choreography dictated the costumes as well. So and so they took up quite a lot of new design elements that came along with new fabric as well. So overall, it is costumes are an integral part of ballet. From classical tutus to avant-garde, it's still something that is a very intricate part and a very important part in storytelling through dancing. Another art form that developed in, why isn't it moving? Another art form that developed in Renaissance was opera. Opera is a different style of theatrical performance, and it's a form of theater where the music is fundamental. And the dramatic roles and the storytelling is taken by singers. Opera actually, in literal translation, it means a work, and such a work of music. And it's a collaborative form of art where a lot of people take place, meaning that there is it developed into a very grandiose art form. Where you have a lot of singers who are solo singers, and you have the choir and extras and so on. And with these art forms, you have also theaters that are developing and adjusting in order to accommodate such large productions. Here you see a modern production that I will talk about later. In the beginning, in the late Renaissance and in the early Baroque, the costumes were also in the style of the day. So they were Baroque costumes that were very, very heavy, very elaborate, very extravagant in rich colors. And here they could be as elaborate as possible because there was not so much movement as in ballet. So they could really go overboard if they wanted to. And as I said earlier, in the Baroque aesthetic, they were not very simple when they wanted to convey an image through costumes. So they were heavily decorated. And there is also a practical side to these costumes. And also the fabric had to be authentic. So they were very, very expensive, using silks and brocades and early jacquard fabrics and so on. But I wanted to say that there was a practical side to these lavish costumes. The songs the singers sing in operas are called arias. And the arias, shall I say, one can be an opera lover or not. The arias take quite some time. So they can be from 5 to 10 minutes. And at that time, a singer just stands still, and gives us an aria to the audience. So no matter how much you love opera, or maybe you're not interested at all, at some point in an aria, your eye will travel. So they realized very early on that there has to be something to look at. And no matter how much you concentrate on an aria, you will still have time to dissect a costume and maybe even judge it. So they really wanted it to be not just a feast for the ears, because at that time operatic singing was very, very decorative and full of trills and scales and chacaturas and so on. And they also wanted it to be a visual feast, feast for the eyes. In the beginning, the subjects, as it all derived from Renaissance, the subjects of the plots of these operas were mostly inspired by mythology and mythological characters and so on. So all these costumes were embellished by different mythological creatures and decorations through embroidery and sculpting and so on to convey as much as possible the visual message. In the Romantic period, saw a different kind of opulence and extravagance because they went on researching mythological stories and historical stories as well. But the costumes became a little bit more conceptual in the meaning that they were not necessarily a fashion of the day, just decorated with heavy elements, but they also wanted to portray a certain fantasy. So for instance, here we have the first picture on the right is for Giuditta Pasta, I believe, who was Bellini's favorite. So that's, let's say 1820, 1830. And here she is depicted in her costume for the famous opera Norma. Norma, so it's set at the time of neoclassicism, when they really rediscover the style of antiquity, and it applies to clothing as well. So that story of Norma, who's an Etrurian princess, high priestess, who falls in love with a Roman soldier, really applies to the fashion of the time. So this gown that she's wearing is quite fashionable, but still has a little bit more of the symbolic of a particular period. Left from her, we have still Giuditta Pasta, who was a famous favorite of Bellini, portrayed in her costume for Anna Bolena. Anna Bolena, oh, then it's Donizetti's opera, sorry, Anna Bolena. And here she's depicted as Anne Boleyn, the famous wife of Henry VIII. And you see that it has certain lines. We have to understand that at this time, they didn't really have a lot of means of research. So they didn't have big libraries where you can go and research certain costumes, or not even, or internet and so on. So it's so for a costume designer to find a source through which they can gather inspiration for a particular role was a very heavy task to do. And still, as the silhouette a little bit reminds of Anne Boleyn, it's still the silhouette is and the treatment of the fabric is very much in the style of the day. Underneath, we have a sketch for Donizetti's famous opera Semiramide that takes a time in Mesopotamia. And you can see it's a drapey costume that evokes the Mesopotamian Empire, but it still has a lot of visual elements of the current day's fashion. So it's really, really, shall I say, a mixture in these fantasy performances. They really had a mixture of styles, but the most important thing was to convey a message. So I will show you again a little video. I hope I will be able to share it successfully. This is the first picture that we saw when I started talking about opera. Was a famous opera by Puccini called Turandot. And I want to show you the final scene from Turandot. It's one of the most grandiose operas of all time. And this production is one of the most grandiose as well. So you see now the screen sharing here, right?
Yes, Ferenc.
And we can watch the video. It's very short.
Okay.
We can see the screen share.
It didn't open. We just see the image. It's this WhatsApp video, Ferenc.
The video again doesn't play.
No, We see only the little image on your desktop.
But the first one you were able to see, right?
Yes.
So then I will show it on the picture, and maybe we can see it. That's the sad thing about the PowerPoint is that that the program does not allow videos. It's a little bit, the times change and PowerPoint didn't, so I could not put videos in the presentation. That's why I'm doing this. So this is a picture of Puccini's Turandot. It's set in the ancient Chinese city of Beijing during the Qing Empire. And this is a production done by Franco Zeffirelli, who was one of the most famous opera directors. And you see why I want to show you this picture. Because in costume design, it was very important in opera to make a distinction, a visual distinction between the characters. So in the middle, you see the main character who is dressed very lightly, meaning that she's dressed in white, to pop out, and you see under her the choir, and they are all dressed in dark colors to make a distinction, and in this production also to give the idea of space. And also you see all the courtiers and the extras and so on, who are dressed in gold colors to match with the background, so the solo, the singer, can stand out even more. So we will try to share the video one more time. If it doesn't work, I give up. Not on the class, but on this video sharing. So let's use. Ah, okay. Now I see what's the thing. Okay, there's always something new to learn.
Okay.
So it's not enough to show the video. I have to go into the video player. Now you see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, now we can see it, yes.
Yeah.
The sound is on FERENCE.
Yes.
Okay, we cannot hear, but we see.
So it's a very short video of an operatic performance. Now this is becoming more and more complicated. Yes, so somehow the presentation ran away a little bit.
It's okay.
So from current slide. All right, here we are. So you saw the difference between the choir and the solo performers who stand out from the background. Now we will continue the history and go back to the 19th century and go further into the 19th century as the industrial revolution began and the Victorian era came along and so on. New changes in the world of theater emerged. New subjects. People were not keen even on operas at some point as much, because operas and ballets showed so imaginary stories and so on, and the storylines were quite well known, but they needed new forms. So we had historical revivals of ancient stories, and we also had existential stories. So a lot of waves started coming into the world of theater, which affected the costume as well. So Charles Keane was one famous English actor who also revolutionized a little bit costume design as well. As he played historical roles like Shakespeare and so on, he really wanted to be as historically accurate as possible, but still to put the actor forward. So he tried an idea of simplifying the costumes by creating muted tones, darker tones, and simplify it as much as possible in order to convey a certain character that he was playing. Now, in the 20th century, as we had new waves of theater, we had the theater of absurd and a lot of other styles, the costumes started becoming more and more experimental as well. Here we have, for instance, down left, we have Alfred Jarry's Roi B, and because it's as an absurd theater, the costumes as well started becoming more and more conceptual to convey a message. And also left, right, so actually the rest of the sketches were Cubist, done by Cubist artists, and Picasso, for instance, as well, who started dabbling in theater design, in costume design and set design as well. So in this period, at the beginning of the 20th century, they realized that they can use an absolute style as part of the direction of the play. So it was not anymore a recreation of historical costumes, or even in the late 19th century, we started having existential stories that were set in current times, showing current problems, but it showed another way in portraying a visual appeal. So here we have, for instance, Cubist art merging with theater, and that showed a lot of experiment in textile as well. Here we have another example of Art Deco in theater design, in costume design and set design. These are work by Roman de Tirtov, better known as Erte, and these are his designs for Strauss, for an opera written by Strauss called Rosenkavalier. Here you see left a sketch of his set, a right of his costume, and down in the middle you see a realized production. And it's, even though the original piece is set in 18th century, this is an Art Deco, so it's done through the lens of the style of Art Deco. In contemporary theater, whether it's opera, whether it's ballet or drama, you need to have a lot of things to consider, meaning that all these waves that happened in costume design history had put on a lot of work for a costume designer to consider before even approaching to design for a play. So authenticity and realism. For instance, when recreating in today's time, when recreating historical plays with today's means that we have for research and fabric development and so on, we can really go further in realizing authentic historical costumes. With the character, you know, so many artistic waves went through the theater, so we have a lot of expressions from which we can draw inspiration in order to build a character. Versatility also gives a open door to creativity, to be as versatile as possible in mixing the styles, so you can be innovative and experimental. So, for instance, here in the upper picture depicts the famous Diana Damrau singing the Queen of the Night in Mozart's Magic Flute. And you can see that her costume is, even though it has somehow the silhouette of the past, it has a lot of modern approach to solving the idea of how to convey a Queen of the Night. And the picture down is today's production of King Ibi with some more contemporary elements. Cultural sensitivity and diversity is so today, in conveying a concept, a visual concept, we can do a mixture of cultures because we are able to mix up different concepts in order to make a visual portrayal of a play. So we can choose from different cultures and different styles and traditional costume and so on in order to convey a visual image. Technology integration. So that's one of the best things about costume design and our work, that technology improved a lot. So we have printing on fabric, laser cutting, 3D printing, and so on, which really helps in multiplying costumes or creating elaborate pieces that
Hello, Terence, are you there?
Yes, parents?
Ah, ah.
Maybe the internet.
Probably his internet broke. I will message him now to
Yes,
see if
yes,
everything is okay.
yes,
Mhm.
he will come back. We are waiting.
Sure, it's nothing to worry about.
No, of course. I feel we are a great company here. The lesson is very interesting. That's my sense. In Belgrade, they had a storm this afternoon, a big storm, and that's why FERENCE.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I'm not currently in the Belgrade, but I've heard that it was very messy.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Here he comes.
yes. Everybody hears me?
Yes, we missed you.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, I have a very old computer, and even though I put a fan behind it, it's still overheated.
Oh, okay.
So here I am, I'm back.
are
Hopefully,
you able to continue?
I hope I'm able to continue. I actually put a fan behind my computer.
Oh my God. Yes.
So here we are. So I talked about technology and some different, a new thing that we must consider in our line of work today is always environmental sustainability. I myself cannot say a lot about that because I think that costume design is quite sustainable by itself, because when we make a costume, it lasts long, but of course we have to think about the dyes that we use and chemicals that we use on costumes to be more environmental, and that the costume design is more sustainable, meaning that more and more costumes are redone and redesigned from archives. Collaboration with other designers. Costume design really became, in today's theater, a concept where, one moment, So here I am. So a concept where you have to collaborate with other designers in order to portray the visual concept of the play. Without that, it's not working anymore. So it's not like in the 19th century where we recreate a historical drama. So we know that, for instance, we want to do Babylon. We need a set designer to design a set that inspired by Babylon. And so does the costume designer. Does it match? Not always, but maybe it does, and so on. So today there is a very big attention paid to the visual appeal and the visual concept of the play that is discussed very early on in a production with other designers, the director, and so on. So what is it that we consider when designing or choosing a fabric? So the character and the role, the period and the setting, movement and comfort, durability, color and texture, budget. That's always the most important thing for a costume designer to understand, to know what the budget is, because directors have a tendency to have great fantasies, great ambitions, but if we do not have the budget for that, it's very often that we cannot pull a rabbit out of a hat. So maintenance, a theater costume is not only for one wear. We really need to consider that it can run maybe forever. You have on Broadway you have productions that run for 30, 40 seasons. For instance, I believe that Cats is still running, and it premiered somewhere in the 80s, early 80s. Special effects. In today's day and age, we often have a lot of special effects that are connected with the costume, whether it's LED lighting or an effect of a quick costume change, that we really have to consider that as well. Availability, so that the fabrics are available, especially in the quantity that we want it. Collaboration, that really we can say that it means that I will show that later. I will show later what the collaboration means. So the character and the role, we discussed it earlier. Time period and setting, movement and comfort. Movement and comfort. You saw ballet. You saw ballet and how much they have to move in order to do a successful performance. So one really has to understand the fabric, meaning that it has to be, for instance, stretchy for dancers. I did a play recently, and I renewed a play, and there were a little bit of problems with the costumes because they had to be dressed in contemporary clothes, but some of the dancers did have contemporary clothes without any stretch, so they were not really able to move in them. So those are really the characteristics that one has to pay attention to. Fabric types used in costume design. So whether it's written twice, synthetic fabrics, a mistake. So whether you use natural fibers, synthetic fibers, it really depends on what is it that you want to convey. Synthetic fibers are very much helpful in, especially in dance. Dance really cannot be imagined without synthetic fabrics and knitted fabrics. So even the tights that you see the ballet dancers wearing are actually knitted. So although machine knitted, it's not like when your grandmother is knitting it. So one really has to think about, will it last? And also will it convey the message? That's when luxurious fabrics come in the story. For instance, you saw Turandot. Turandot is filled with luxurious fabrics and it's possible because the singers are not moving a lot, so a lot can be displayed on them, and the idea of an opera such as that is to be as grandiose as possible. Specialty and novelty fabrics, that comes with new times, and sometimes you want to convey classical storylines or classical silhouettes through special fabrics and novel fabrics, meaning that, of course, they didn't have lame in the 18th century, but somehow the idea of a lame fabric can work in a concept of an 18th century dress. So you try it on and you manipulate it and get a desired effect. Upcycle textiles. That's something that's done very, very often in theater. In theater productions, it's not a rare thing that a costume designer goes into the archive and redesigns costumes that already exist, reuses them, and fabrics that already exist. And that's part of sustainability. Fabric manipulation. So as I said, in this day and age, we can be as playful as we want in order to make a costume and to convey a message. So we saw through history a lot of abstract movements and a lot of different artistic movements that went through the theater. And that's a legacy that we consider when designing a costume. So we can be as playful as we want. So whether we're using pleating or gathering or ruching or quilting or tucking and ruffling, braiding. So anything that comes into the poeticism of your costume. Now I have another video that I will try to share. Would be nice if I manage. I think I realize now how I have to do it. So this is a short video from the costume dyeing workshop of, I believe it's the Royal Opera House.
Let's see.
So yes, here is the media player. So you see it?
Yes, yes, Ferenc.
You hear the sound?
Yes. Not very good, but
So what I'm going to do is finish off.
There is no sound. It's echo.
Well, if
yes,
there is no sound, then I will try to explain it.
yeah, it's tax. It's because of the internet. It has a
Okay.
sound.
Okay, so I will try to explain it. She is now recreating a fabric that is used as for Donna Anna in the Marriage of Figaro. And she is dyeing the fabric. This is the dyeing and fabric dyeing workshop in the Opera House. And they always do an exact measurement, an exact quantity of the paint in order to get a formula so the fabric can be reproduced as many times as possible and needed. Because when there is an operatic performance, you don't do just one costume. You do more than one, because they're not the same. You cannot always get the same singer, and two singers can maybe not fit into the same costume. So you have to do costumes. As you see, it's a trial and error where she tries to get the perfect shade. At this point, she managed to get the perfect shade, and they are going to paint it right now because the original piece has ink stains. So this is the original costume, right? That is created for Donna Anna. As you can see, it's a period style costume, an 18th century style with a modern approach to it. The costume designer wanted it to look like ink has spilled all over the costume, but still it had to be controlled. So parts of the costume are digitally printed and parts hand painted. So even though it's hand painted, one has to be very much in control. So you cannot not just splash it onto the fabric, because the designer was very specific. Sometimes the designer wants it to be accidental as possible. So they have to create different approaches to recreate these stains, and if possible, every time as similar as possible. So you can see that she has different approaches to making stains.
Interesting.
And she also uses a fan later to block the paint so it doesn't bleed all over the fabric. That's also so when creating costumes like these and even more elaborate costumes, one has to be very experimental, meaning that there is a lot of tryouts that go before a final costume is created with, and the result is really, really, really beautiful.
Yeah.
So we go on. Cancel. Now the Zoom is demanding something from me. Okay, I'm not demanding anything from Zoom.
Thank you, Ferenc.
We go back to my presentation. So from the current slide. And what is it that we want to achieve when designing a costume? We want character expression, sometimes historical accuracy, or fantasy and theatricality. So the upper picture is the famous singer Renata Scotto singing Manon at the Metropolitan Opera. The aim of this production was historical accuracy. So this is a very much historically accurate 18th century gown. Left, we have, it's an opera, I don't remember the singer's name, but the opera is called Akhenaton, but composed by Philip Glass. So he represents a pharaoh here, who is an historical character, but the opera itself has a lot of elements of fantasy and theatricality. So it was more important to convey an image of a pharaoh than to be historically accurate, because the effect was very important. So when you see his costume, you will see that the fabrics are actually quite contemporary. He actually even has like dolls' faces on his shoulder, and lots of different types of golden ribbons, and a lot of fabric manipulation is going on. But the effect is there. He really looks like a pharaoh.
Yeah.
So the next step, one moment. So the next step is transformation and metamorphosis. That really means that you have to transform an actor into the character. It has to be conveying. Whatever the approach is, whatever the means of techniques that you are using in order to create the character, it has to transform. So, you know, sometimes you really are creating fantastic beasts and beings on stage that are really hard to understand how it's made, but it's still a conveying image. Costumizing and detailing. That means that we really have to understand the human body, because all of this is worn by people. And we have to not only customize to the performance, but sometimes even manipulate their body. Because sometimes you will get, for instance, we have an 18th century costume. Sometimes you will get a singer who is not really built for it, or does not have the proper figure for it. But that's your task as a costume designer, to make a design if possible. Sometimes it is not possible, so we costume designers get criticized for a lot of reasons, but sometimes it is possible to use different tricks, visual tricks, to convey the silhouette. Collaboration and innovation. So as I mentioned already quite a few times, that costume design in this day and age is a big collaboration, because it's a teamwork. It's a teamwork. You never work alone. there are many people involved in creating a costume design. So I would like to talk about this part through my personal experience as a costume designer. So in a well-equipped theater, you would start, for instance, when I was an assistant, we did a play in 6 weeks. So if it was a drama, for drama, we had 6 weeks to put out the play. Earlier, a week before that, the costume designer and the assistant meets with the departments, the workshops, the tailoring department, the wig makers, the makeup people, the people from the coloring department, it all depends who you need, and you gather all these people and decide and explain the concept of what you are doing. You show the sketches. It depends on what kind of sketches you do. For instance, in this day and age, most people like to do collages in Photoshop, and it is a very convenient mean of sketching. And as you go on, until these 6 weeks are up, a lot of people are working on it, and you see here pictures of costume workshops working hard, wig makers, makeup people, and so on. And for instance, when you show to the departments what you will do for costume, you have the initial reading. The initial reading is very important also for a costume designer, because that's the first time when the whole all the actors and the director and the creative team meets and reads through the text. And that's when you show your sketches to the actors. It's very important. For instance, when I was an assistant and later on when I started working in the rehearsal space, we always had the sketches hanging. We always had the sketches hanging on a wall because it was a very good visual reference to the actors whenever they wanted to think about the movement. And from the very beginning, they need mock-up costumes because sometimes a costume in drama or in opera can be very restricting. For instance, I had a play where the actress had to wear a very large velvet crinoline, but the set was very difficult to walk on because there were a lot of boards, and so there was a lot of jumping and climbing. There was not a flat surface on that stage. So to walk on it, to jump on it, to run on it in a crinoline is really something not very, very easy. So from the very initial rehearsal, the actors need to have mark-up costumes in order to feel the silhouette and to build the movement and the character around the costume as well. And they have the visual reference hanging on the wall as well. So for that you need, I had to write it down that for this line of work you need a lot of patience and communication. You work with a lot of people. And when you work with a lot of people, there are a lot of different opinions, a lot of different ideas, and it can be very challenging. So when you do even the first fitting with actors, it's also an art form of itself, because sometimes the actor does not feel confident in the costume. Sometimes you have to give them confidence that they didn't know they have. Sometimes the actor can be difficult as well, so you have to convince them and even manipulate them. But sometimes the actors can be also very beneficial in developing the costume, because for instance, when you do dance plays where contemporary dance with contemporary costumes and with experimental costumes, you really have to be on good terms with the actors in order for the experiment to be successful. So it is always, I like the fittings. I like the fittings because they're always very close and very personal, and I'm able to be with the actors one-on-one. And then, for instance, we try on the costume and how does it move? Can she move? We experiment with the movements in the fitting room. So through all this that I mentioned, we create a unique language that is costume design. There are so many elements and such a creativity in creating costume design that that is conveyable most of the time only in theater. It's because the space between us and the audience, but the space between the performance and the audience gives a space of fantasy, a space of imagination. So here this visual language does not always translate in another art form. So for instance, you have here up this ballerina from the Swan Lake. So actually we see a dress, clothing, but the elements and the tradition of the art form really visually informs us that she's and her dancing as well, that she's representing a swan. And down under her, we have a picture from the very, very famous musical Cats. I took that as an example because you see the costume is very creative. It involved printing and adding different threads and yarn and so on. And it's a very, very, very creative approach and very chaotic. And it has also a lot of fashion elements as well. But through the interpretation of the actor, it translates as a cat. And it became a hit and is still a very, very famous musical. And why am I mentioning this? Because a few years ago, I believe it was actually quite recent, they made a movie, they made the movie Cats. They made a movie from this musical, and they had the same approach in costume design and even adding 3D technology, and it just didn't translate. It just didn't work because this approach to costume design in a movie, they looked like ridiculous creatures and very, very strangely looking half man, half cat. So in a movie screen, this design approach that is done in theater is not always possible. On the other hand, we have on the left side, we have the Lion King musical. So the Lion King is actually a cartoon that we've all seen about animals. And so they couldn't really put large animals on stage, but the language of costume design and the creativity behind it, as you see, you have here a lot of puppeteers manipulating big puppets in order to create these animals. The characters have headdresses that reminds of the animals that they are representing. They have a lot of different costume elements that would never translate on a movie, but somehow in costume design it works. It's a magic of its own. It's the magic of live performance that really, really conveys the audience. And with that, I would like to conclude this part of the presentation. So right now, I'm very, very open to questions or having a little bit of discussions. Is anybody here still?
Yes, we are all here and we are all listening.
Yes, we're here.
So, do we have any questions? Or is there anything else that you would like me to make a little bit more clear or to elaborate on?
Mm.
Somebody had a question when I was talking about ballet.
Yes. Can you all hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, thank you. The question that I was having on the ballet dressing,
Yes.
I was inquiring to know if there is a particular reason as to why the ballet dress looks exactly like that, or is there a special thing about it, why it should look like that, or it's about the movement, the comfort and the movement that makes it the dress look like that, and also the shoes they wear. Is it for a particular reason or just a
Yes.
design of its own?
Yes, so in ballet, as I mentioned, there is the traditional style of classical ballet, which is actually very restricted in costume. So with time, it adapted as much as possible, meaning that even though the silhouette of the tutu and so on is very much in the historical style, as you saw through fabric manipulation, there were some adaptations to it. So, for instance, when we want to create a swan's costume in this day and age, we don't use real feathers like they did for Pavlova, for instance, at the beginning of the 20th century. We use different techniques that evolved with time through ruching and pleating to create a feather-like silhouette, which makes the costumes actually but the shoes remain the same. So the pointy shoes are really that have the function of being able to do a particular movement. So that is something that in classical ballet is not negotiable, But in contemporary ballet, as I said, contemporary ballet is more driven by choreography and experimentation experimentation with the movement. So there is a much bigger attention that is paid on comfort and the textiles, that they have to be comfortable, because the movements are much more experimental and often very much more demanding than in classical ballet. So the comfort is much more important in contemporary ballet, even when it comes to footwear. So contemporary ballet is driven more by the choreography and experimentation of the movement. So there, the costume designer really has to adapt, especially with knowledge. It doesn't mean that you need to have a whole book of fabrics in your head. It just because when you go into an archive of fabrics, by feeling it, you have to see, oh, it's stretchy, oh, it's light, or you pick it up and hold it up and check it out, and you see it can work. I hope this answers your question. So anybody else?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm. Okay, can I ask a question?
Yes, but I cannot hear you very well.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, still.
Okay, first of all, wonderful presentation, Ferenc. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I wanted to ask you, how do you feel about historical inaccuracy in popular historical TV dramas and movies today? And where do you think is the line where the costume designer can basically imagine the costume and not being accurate to the historical costumes that we know that how they looked?
I didn't understand the second part of your question.
Where do you think is the line between being creative and doing injustice to a certain period?
All right. So when it comes to TV and movies, I would like to discuss that more next week, because we will be talking about movies and television, but still I can answer it, of course. Historical inaccuracy. Well, sometimes it reads as a mistake, and sometimes it reads as intentional, and that's the thing that one has to, that's a part of the collaboration, that with the directors, you have a strong visual vision of what the concept of the costume will be. So maybe you want to convey the idea of having a costume that is inspired by historical subjects, but is actually leaning more towards creative. So that gives a lot of freedom in the concept of the movie or even theater. But if you want total historical accuracy and you put a zipper on a medieval costume, a visible zipper, because as a creative person, you must be able to hide some of the things, for instance, a zipper. But if such things are visible in dramas that have a tendency to be historically inaccurate, that really reads as a mistake. So where is the line between being creative and being able to reconstruct? Well, being able to reconstruct is also, in my opinion, quite creative by itself, because you really have to understand the period. You really have to understand how certain things. I'm sorry, somebody is playing with their microphone. Okay, now I don't hear anything. And so you really have to be able to understand a certain period through research, and to understand how certain fabrics are made. So basically, before trying anything in costume design, you really have to know how clothes are made and learn how to sew, learn how to tailor, learn how to drape, in order to understand, especially if you want to do historical costume. So where does the creativity lie in that? Is because when you understand a period completely, then you are able to design, to be creative and to design something new, but in the spirit of the period completely. So that's where the creativity lies in reconstructing historical costumes. So, do we have somebody else?
Thank you, Ferenc.
You're welcome.
That was
Thank
awesome.
you. Thank you, Ferenc.
So, does anybody have maybe another question?
Hello.
Or they would like me to? Oh, hello.
Hello. Good evening from me as well. What a wonderful presentation. And I have to say that Danilo stole my first question, but I am so happy that there are people here that they want to interact and create a very nice conversation. My first question is, did you ever have a really tough experience with actors or actresses' opinions on a costume? Or did you ever had a different design aspect between you and the director? And how do you usually solve this kind of situations?
Oh, well, that's a very interesting question. Now I can gossip about actors. I did have I can say a lot of bad experiences from a lot of points. So I can say that at some points in this profession, it was very tough to be a man. Because this is predominantly a female profession, and women and everybody feels more comfortable, for instance, changing their clothes when they're around women. So in the beginning, when I was an assistant, I really had problems where, for instance, actresses don't want me to be in the fitting room because they are shy, or seamstresses don't allow me to come in, and so on. So that has been a little bit of difficulty, but you always have to find a way around it. And sometimes it did happen that you get an actor that who does not want to collaborate. He or she, they just don't want to collaborate. Because especially, for instance, with historical pieces, they don't like the costume because it's quite restrictive. And then you have to be quite calm. It's always, you can never really lose your cool. So it's just something that is not allowed for us costume designers. So if necessary, you go out for 10 seconds, you breathe in, come in, and try to keep your voice as light as possible. That was also a difficulty being a man, because when if I become argumentative, my voice becomes bigger and deeper, and that scares people. And but sometimes when it comes to historical costumes, you have actors who just do not want to collaborate, as I said, because they find the costumes to be restrictive. Then I try to explain to them that that it's not because the costume is bad. If you have a certain costume that restricts you, those are not restrictions of bad tailoring and bad design necessarily, but sometimes it's restriction of a period. So, for instance, in an 18th century gown, an actress cannot put her hands like this. She just can't do it, and it's not necessarily an appropriate movement. And those are always things that you go over with the director. So, yes, I had quite a few experiences, and you know, it's always a very humbling experience when the actors don't respect your profession. So it's very hard when you see a costume that you worked a lot on and they don't take care of it. So for instance, in the 30s, we will see that when I talk about movies, there was a specific style of cutting dresses that was called bias cutting, especially for satin. It's cut from the 45 angle, and then the dress just spills all over the body. You cannot sit on it. You cannot sit in it because it will get wrinkled. And at that point, for instance, actresses, when they put on the costume, they don't sit down anymore until they take it off. And sometimes you really have actors who don't want to collaborate. Sometimes it is also with a director, because sometimes the director is not very, in my opinion, the best directors are very much familiar with costume and set design as well. So for instance, I showed you a production of Turandot, or the opera Turandot, the Chinese style, and that was done by Franco Sefirelli. Franco Sefirelli was involved in the costume design and in the set design. So he did all of it and directing. So he really understood what costume is. But sometimes you have a director who does not understand what is costume and how a costume should move. And they want something that is not really possible. But you always have to do your best. And as costume designers, I don't know if it's nice to say, but we have to learn how to be manipulative. We have to learn how to manipulate people for the better of the project, or for the result that we want to achieve, because we are a department that works hard with a lot of people, and sometimes it happens that we are at fault for a lot of things. So I hope I answered your question. Was that?
Yeah, I have a second one though.
Yeah, sure.
At the end of the day, even being an actor, it's a job. They are there to do their
Yes.
job and be paid about it.
Yes.
And as far as I know, we live in the current time. Psychological force and psychological harassment is something that it's quite tough to go on with it. So whose opportunity is to control the bad attitude most of the time? Because it's a very collaborative work.
Yeah.
Between artists, artisans, actors, seamstresses. But human communication, it's a bit
Yeah.
weird sometimes.
Yeah.
And we need to set lines.
Yeah.
We live in 2024, and as far as I'm concerned, there, this can't be going on right now. Like, right now, we are in a position that nobody has the right to force someone psychologically or do really, really bad criticism because they just want to. So whose responsibility is this in a theater, in control everything?
Yeah. Well, it first and foremost, it has to start with education. It has to start with good education, meaning that all the departments, so designers and actors and directors, really learn in school what their job is and what they have to do. So when they really learn their job good, they are able to be disciplined. For instance, I worked in Austria in theater for a year or so, and I must say that the actors there with whom I worked were extremely disciplined. So, and there was never really a problem, because there are the little problems, you know. Sometimes we're all humans and we all like to be indulged. So sometimes you would have an actor or an actress who would be a little bit more demanding, meaning that they want to be indulged, but you try to do the best to keep the peace. But it did happen, for instance, that we had conflict. So at that point, I was an assistant, and I did have some harassment from an actor. So I told that to the costume designer. So the costume designer was my boss and had a responsibility for it. And the costume designer, if things are not working out, goes to the director. And fortunately, it was stopped because I was very young, and the costume designer stopped the conflict. So I think the most important thing is education and knowing one's role. So when we learn what is it that we have to do, we understand the boundaries a lot better.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're
Hello.
welcome. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
May I give a little bit of comments regarding previous conversation?
Sure.
My name is Bojana. I'm graduated from Faculty of Applied Art in Belgrade, but I must say we must have a subject in our educational system, especially in Faculty of Art, like art of negotiation.
Exactly, yes.
Art of
Agree.
communication,
Yes.
PR, and marketing.
Yes.
Because I think that's a lack of the system of education. I mean, in Serbia, I don't know how is curriculum in other country, but nobody prepare us for our future job.
Yeah. Well, usually in costume design, I also studied at the Faculty of Applied Arts, and you really don't learn.
Sorry, I am a colleague, textile designer.
Oh, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Also,
so we really, that is a problem that in schools in general, as I spoke to other colleagues from different colleges from Europe, you don't learn in school how to behave with actors. That is something that you learn on the job. So it is very important. In Serbia, it is very difficult to get a job as an assistant in theater, but in European theaters, it is not that difficult because it's a state job. So each and every theater, every year, they put out how you say, so you can apply for a job. They put out job applications for assistants each and every season. So you can apply to be a designer, and that's what you do at the beginning as an assistant costume designer or an assistant set designer in the beginning, and that's where you learn the trade. through experience. And
Yes.
that's when an older costume designer comes in, and that's where you meet the departments. That's when the head of costume department in the theater talks with you about how you should work, what is your job, how to behave with actors. That's where you meet different colleagues who are already working in the profession. So human relations and the communication in this profession is really something that is learned through working.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thank you very much.
You're welcome. So, does anybody else have a question?
Small one.
Hello?
Hello? Sí, no me naman dito sa pinapalit.
Will the work will the notes be sent?
Yes, we hear you, Catherine.
Yes, I'm inquiring whether the notes will be sent to go through once again. The notes of the lesson. Thank you.
So it was not clear, Ference.
Uh-huh.
I'm saying,
Yes,
hello. I'm requesting that will the notes be sent? The notes of the class, the
the
lesson.
notes, yes, of the class.
Yes, I wanted to go through those the Medio, the Renaissance periods. I wanted to go through them, though the screen was a bit fast. So that's why I was inquiring if whether they will be sent afterwards. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, Ference, Catherine says if she can have the notes after the class to have the time to study them again. And okay, the notes, the links.
Yes, of course. I can send the complete presentation, of course. Of course. I can forward it to Mika. They are actually in contact with Mika right now. So I can send it to Mika, and then they can whoever wants it, whoever would like to read through it and so on, I will show you gladly, of course.
Okay. Okay, Catherine, we hope we answered. Okay. So,
thank you, and it's to all of us. Thank you in advance.
Thank you.
I have another question.
Sure, I'm here.
When you started working at the theater, were you asked to have certain skills except the tailoring and the sketching?
When I started working as an assistant, I was not required to have those skills. So as an assistant, you are not, you don't have the right to go into the workshops. So your main, in European theaters, so your main job is actually communication. So you're the one who's communicating between the costume designer and all the workshops. So for instance, as an assistant, I was the one that I had to collect the mock-up costumes for the rehearsals based on the sketches. So for instance, if we have a crinoline, I get a hoop skirt and so on. So I had to collect that. I had to do shopping, and I had to do communication, meaning that you have to organize all the appointments because they're all fittings. You have 2 fittings for each actor in the tailoring workshop. You have fittings with the wig makers. You have fittings with the makeup people, and that's something that an assistant organizes. And also I had to document everything, meaning that on the fittings I had to document the costumes, and I was also a set designer assistant, so I had to document the whole final product. So when I leave the production, I would leave a folder in a computer where the whole production would be documented. So if the production is ever brought back, I did appropriately document it so we can bring it back. I also had to do schedules for the premiere. I was the one who was making schedules, who is coming when, which actor in the theater, when do they go to the hair and makeup, when do they go to dress, and so on. So I never did anything in the workshops. Sometimes, yes.
Okay, so it's like Anne Hathaway at Devil Wears Prada, who
Exactly.
just always scheduling the writing and keep notice and go around and pick up everything.
Exactly.
But do you communicated with the wardrobe department or not?
Yes, of course, I communicated with them because the wardrobers. Because when you give a premiere, there is a documentation that you prepared. So I, as an assistant, I give the costumes to the wardrobers, which all the I put notations where I write changes, when does what, when which actor changes when, and so on. I gave the play with all the documentation to the hair and makeup. So that's not the job of the designer. But as a designer, I need to have skills of sketching and all the because, for instance, the designer as well rarely does any workshop work in a big theater. So, but you still need to have all this experience and knowledge under your belt in order to design successfully.
As an assistant, were you ever asked about your opinion on a costume, on a wig, or anything?
It depended on the designer. It really depended on the designer. Usually when you meet a designer as an assistant, you don't know them. So they don't know what's your education, what's your style, what's your taste, and therefore they do not ask for your opinion. And most often I was not asked for my opinion. And it's actually the description of the job is that I do not have an opinion as an assistant. But I had, for instance, situations where I got a fashion designer, a costume designer, who really didn't know what she was doing. She just got the gig because, let's say, she always does set design, and somebody said, well, would you like to try costume? And she was like, sure, I could do costume as well. And then when we started working together, she didn't prepare the sketches in time, and she didn't know how to sketch costumes, so I sketched them for her. When we needed to work on the costume. So I was really the part of the creative process because she leaned on me quite a lot. And that's a very, very tough experience when you have a designer who doesn't know what they want, and you have to design and do what an assistant does, because an assistant works a lot. And doing both was very difficult, especially because I was not paid double. Yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. I thought before my question, all these years, that we as, aspiring assistants and trainees need to apply with a portfolio.
Usually when, in my experience in Europe, I had to put a curriculum, a CV. I needed to send a CV, but no portfolio. No portfolio, because assisting is really job experience. Nobody cares if you're creative or you can sew or you have because sometimes, for instance, people go assist in theaters before going to college. So some people in Europe especially go to high schools that are art high schools, and when they finish, they are 18 years of age, they can work, and they get to work as an assistant in the theater. So they learn the job experience, what does it entail, and then when they learned the work of a costume designer, what is it that the costume designer does, then they go and study art. So I saw situations like that as well, which I think is a very good approach.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. So, do we have anyone else?
We want more.
Well, I don't know what more. Maybe I can sing a song. But if anybody has a question, I will gladly answer.
You're great. I have to say I have met Ferenc and he loves his work, his job.
Yes,
And
that's also something that is very important when if you want to go in costume design or even fashion design. I, for instance, studied fashion design, but as it happened, I do more costume. You really have to love it. There's no other way around it. You have to be in love with the profession because it's very time consuming. We do not work 9 to 5. We work on projects. It's very tiring. It takes a lot of skills and a lot of people skills, you know, when it comes to communication. So you really have to love it. There is no other way around it.
yes, Ferenc. And to love people, I would like to add in every job, love the professionals of all types. You have to do with them. You have to understand, to love them, to cooperate. Everything you said before, of course. I think you did it great, Ferenc.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody who were here and watched this
I
lesson.
hope it was useful. I hope it was helpful. And we see each other next week when we will discuss movie history, costume design in movies, and television.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we close this meeting, this lesson. Everyone is okay? Someone
All right.
else? Okay. Okay. So we have
Thank
to
you
say
very
goodbye.
much.
Stay healthy and inspired and happy, everybody. Till our next
Thank
meeting.
you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
See you.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, parents.
See you
Thank
next
Bye-bye.
week.
everybody. Kisses. Hi, Danilo. Thank you.
Mm.
Hi, Panos. Zenaida, Antonia, Dragana, Claire, Catherine, Joanna, Yaho, Reis, Rodriguez. I'm not sure. Sorry about the names. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.